Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome back. Happy Wednesday. We're here to talk more mental health during Mental Health Awareness Month, where we are raising money for Vibrant Inc. Let me hide that real quick. So you can see that we have raised $1,125 of our $5,000 goal. We are halfway through the month, not yet halfway to our goal, but I believe that we will make it. We're talking about anxiety today, panic disorder, panic attacks as well, maybe touching into some PTSD, but largely focused for anxiety today. If you missed it last week, we talked in a pretty good amount of depth, I think, about depression. I would definitely go and check that out. It never hurts to be informed. One of the worst things about the hardest things about anxiety or depression is if it hits you and you have no idea what's going on. It does become more tolerable the more knowledgeable you are about it, I've found. So having that knowledge in your back pocket, helpful. And if it doesn't help yourself, maybe something you can use something to help others. But if you do want to give to Vibrant Emotional Health, which runs the 988 crisis suicide and crisis hotline, if you are in the US and find yourself in a crisis, you can dial that number, or you can text, or you can go to their website and do a chat. And we are raising money for them. A fantastic cause. We're happy to be doing it. How's everyone doing today? Thank you, Thwartleby, for the 62 months. It's a lot of months. Make sure I've got it up so I can see donations. I do. Very good. We should be good there. Saturday, I'm going to be streaming Mind Games Episode 3. We will be doing Psychonauts 2 and other games. Is it called Chicory? A Colorful Tale, I believe, is another one that we'll be covering. Let's see. I've got the list somewhere. Anxiety games, mental health games to stream. I do not believe this background is AI made. So a lot of my images I get from Adobe Stock, but they have an option there to exclude AI images, and I always click it. So it shouldn't be, but I can't guarantee it. That's also where I got this background. Let's see. Yeah, so I had Psychonauts 2, Chicory, Colorful Tale, To the Moon, and a game called Sim, S-Y-M. I'm looking to stream on Saturday. Film Addict. Hey there, Rick. Lovely people on Twitch. Also suffering from chronic anxiety and anxiety attacks. Several times Line Wave has pulled me back from the ledge. Just want to say thank you for spreading awareness. No problem. So, it's going to be structured a lot like our depression talk, where we're going to be talking about what does anxiety feel like? What are some of the symptoms? What causes anxiety? Treatments for anxiety. And what can I do for someone who is suffering from anxiety? Now, there's quite a few different types of recognized anxiety. So I think everything we're going to talk about applies to all of them. You have generalized anxiety disorder. You have panic disorder. You have PTSD. You have social anxiety. So there's all kind of different flavors of the same kind of thing, the same kind of idea. Even obsessive and compulsive disorder falls sort of in that same umbrella. So I'm going to be touching on all that stuff today. I've have experienced all of that, I would say. I've never been diagnosed with social anxiety, with generalized anxiety disorder instead. But I have certainly had anxiousness over social encounters. We'll talk about that. Twilight stressed about aging out of dad's health plan in a month or two. Don't know how to manage health insurance or which brands to trust. Yeah, that's very stressful for sure. I have no idea where you're located or what your options are. For a time, I was using healthcare.gov. I think that's what it is. It's been a while now. Fortunately now, Blind Wave is in a position where we can provide health insurance. And we pay the premiums fully for all employees because I just feel like that's the right thing to do. If we're not gonna do healthcare from the government, then businesses have got to step up, I guess. All right, well, if you're not familiar with me, my name's Rick. I am on a channel called Blind Wave and also Roll with the Punches. I've got both chats up now, the Twitch Blind Wave, twitch.tv/Blind Wave, and the Roll with the Punches YouTube channel. I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder when I was 11 years old, and I was put on antidepressants at that time in order to deal with it. I was undiagnosed with autism, so I've been sort of running the anxiety race my entire life, and I don't want to say mastered, but I've completed that race many times. But I did not realize that I should have been running the autistic race the entire time, which is a slightly different beast, I think. So sort of not correctly treating my autism has led to a lot of issues with anxiety in my life. But I've gotten pretty good at dealing with anxiety. But even so, even with all the knowledge and the techniques and everything that I have accumulated, I had the worst bout of anxiety this past year than I'd ever had in my life. Fortunately, we're on the upswing again. And, a lot of it is the same techniques that I've always known. But there were a few things different this time that I'm really hopeful for the future. Hopefully, less anxiety. Hopefully, less issues with this going on. But also diagnosed with PTSD. Over a year ago, I had a pretty bad panic attack during exercising, running on the treadmill. And that experience really shook me and has been a very difficult thing for me to overcome, the ability to be able to exercise again. Because it was just guaranteed panic attacks every time, and it's been a very difficult thing in order for me to overcome. I do talk about that more in my video journal series, which you can find on the Roll with the Punches channel. I'm happy to answer questions and talk about that today as well. Let's see. OCD is something that I struggled with when I was younger. A lot of germophobic style tendencies that now looking back, I can explain a lot of them with autism. Like I didn't like to touch doorknobs. Why? Well, doorknobs are made of metal, and I don't like touching metal. It's an autistic sensory thing. So, but I have done some studying on obsessive compulsive disorder, and hopefully some of the stuff we talk about today will relate to that as well. Okay, so let's talk about what anxiety feels like. So we'll start with a metaphor. Imagine yourself a piece of treated leather. The stress in your life is a storm. In a healthy state, the rain rolls off from you. You're pliable, you're resilient, you can be pulled in many directions, but as soon as whatever's pulling you lets go, you relax again. Anxiety is what happens when you take that leather and you stretch it tight over a drum. Now every raindrop causes an explosion of sound, of vibration, and of energy. That's kind of how I imagine it and picture it. Because we feel anxious. We have all kind of different feelings of anxiousness, of bewilderness. We are exposed to stressors every single day. But stressors that didn't have an effect on us when we were well, now that we're suffering from anxiety, those same stressors have an amplified reaction to us. Is kind of how I see it. So let's talk about some of the symptoms. And the good news is this list is pretty comprehensive, because something I struggle with anxiety is what's coming next, right? I feel these uncomfortable sensations, but what sensation is going to come next? Now, we can explain what causes the symptoms that you're feeling with anxiety. Most of them come from adrenaline. We'll talk about that. But this list of symptoms, if you've had panic attacks before, it is possible, I would say even likely, that you have experienced, especially if you've dealt with it long enough, you've experienced every sensation and feeling that anxiety can throw at you, which I find comforting. So here's the list. We got fatigue, churning stomach, indignation, racing heart, palpitations, missed heartbeats, sharp pain under the heart, sore feeling around the heart, sweating hands, feelings of pins and needles in the hands and feet, choking feeling in the throat, inability to take a deep breath, tight feeling across the chest, ants crawling under the skin, tight band of pain around the head, heavy weight pressing on top of the head, giddiness, strange tricks of vision, such as apparent movement of inanimate objects, weak spells, sleeplessness, depression, nausea, occasional vomiting, diarrhea, frequent desire to urinate. And I would also say, for me especially, back pain. But people can get other types of pain from just being tense all the time. It can really do a number on your body. Now, obviously, a lot of those symptoms can be explained by other things, and that's what makes anxiety work, right? If I feel like I can't breathe, my mind races back to having asthma as a kid and not being able to breathe. And so it is difficult or impossible to convince yourself that this is not an asthma attack, because it feels so much like I cannot breathe, but it is an anxiety attack. It can be the same with the heart, right? Like, pain in and around the heart is a scary thing, but it can just be caused by anxiety, by panic attacks, by adrenaline. Okay, I thought we might have went down for a second, but I think we're good. Okay, so what causes anxiety? So first of all, like depression, it could be a medical issue. Thyroid is a common culprit, chemical imbalance, some other sort of medical issue. So if you are dealing with anxiety, you do want to be examined by a doctor. One, if there is something to find, hopefully they find it. And two, if there is nothing to find, hopefully that reassures you enough in order to overcome or to help you overcome the anxiety. Sometimes that has helped me, sometimes it hasn't, but it's always a really good place to start. All right, so when it comes to causing these symptoms of anxiety, So we have the voluntary nervous system and we have the involuntary nervous system. The voluntary nervous system is the messages that I send from my brain consciously to my muscles in order to do things, right? That's voluntary. But we have a lot of involuntary systems in our body as well. Breathing, heart beating, and the release of adrenaline from your adrenal glands is one of those. And you have, of those involuntary systems, you have what are called sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. And so the sympathetic systems can respond to your mood. So for example, if you are maybe feeling attracted to someone, you might get that sensation of butterflies in your stomach. You might feel your throat swell up. It's difficult to swallow. You might feel hot, flush in the face. So those are chemicals that are being released because of emotions. And thoughts can cause emotions. That is causing your body to react a certain way. And so the main culprit of anxiety is adrenaline. And it can cause all of those feelings, all those symptoms that I talked about before. And in Claire Weeks' book, bam, which is up here, which is where most of my information is coming from today, is her theories, ideas, and practices. Where was I? Anxiety or adrenaline can cause those anxiety symptoms. And the problem occurs because it can be natural to feel anxious and to feel those feelings. But the issue tends to start to occur when we begin to fear those things, or when we suffer from like a bewilderment where we believe something is wrong, or we don't understand what's going on, and therefore that causes us to fear. And when it comes to things like panic attacks and agoraphobia, we can have these negative experiences, and our brain is always searching for patterns and reasons. So if I have a panic attack at Walmart, for example, my brain is like, okay, well, something here caused it. I'm in danger here, and so therefore I should avoid here in the future, right? And so our brain starts to sort of rewire itself in order to seek explanations for these dangers, and then it reinforces that. Whenever we get to that situation, we then have those panic attacks. It's a cycle. So because of that fear and bewilderment that we're giving it, we can rewire those pathways in order to make our fears true, basically. Now, the good news is, because we can rewire them that way, we can also rewire them back to a healthy way as well. The vast majority of people, it doesn't matter how long you've been suffering from anxiety, can overcome it. Like I said, I was diagnosed when I was 11, and in 2022 there was a good 18 months there where I was free from it. First time in my life. So I had, 20 years of living that anxiety and, trying all the things and all the books. But I never gave up the hope that it was possible. There were a few times I gave up the hope, but the hope came back, and I never stopped trying. So I know it's possible. Now I'm working to get there again, but it is possible. Okay, so when we teach ourselves to be afraid of those sensations, then anxiety prevails. Now, Claire also talks about sort of a second stage or type of anxiety where it is the first stage, but then you also add in overwhelming, so it's caused not necessarily by the sensations, but it's caused by some sort of overwhelming problem, sorrow, guilt, or disgrace. And then not only do you get all those symptoms from before, but you also add in things like indecision, suggestibility, loss of confidence, experiences of unreality, obsession, and depression. And that's what I experienced this past time, where I had a lot of anxiety about a lot of different things that were happening. And I felt like there were some overwhelming problems that I couldn't solve, and I felt a sense of disgrace because I wasn't solving them, and therefore depression got added into the anxiety. And that's how it happened to me a few times during my life. So we're on causes of anxiety. Let's talk about sensitization, which, if you imagine those raindrops on the drum again, is the exaggerated reaction from our nerves to stress. So the feeling of nerves being on edge. And everyone, I think, has felt this. If you've had a particularly stressful day, it's like your nerves are raw at the end of the day, right? Or things that normally don't get to you do get to you. Like a door closing that normally doesn't make you sort of start and jump up, all of a sudden does. So that feeling is natural and happens and will heal. The issue is once we start to fear that state and are also bewildered by it, and then panic sets in. So what's interesting is that a panic attack has two stages. It has that first stage of that shock, right? So the door slams, my body for a moment, and I don't even realize it happening, goes into that danger mode where it puts me on alert. That will quickly fade. What won't quickly fade is if I feed that sensation fear and bewilderment, because then it will grow and I will focus on it and I will keep it alive myself, and it will not fade. So if you do suffer from panic attacks, try to tell yourself that this is in two stages. I don't have any control over the first stage. That's automatic. But the second stage, the fear that I give it, is in my control. I can choose whether or not to fear this thing, whether or not to be bewildered by it. And just that alone will start to give you some power. They will start to fade much quicker. Speaking of fading, let's talk about some treatments for anxiety. So, actually, before we do that, does anyone have any questions before we move on? I tend to get on a roll and go and forget to ask questions. Going to also make sure we haven't missed any donations. We have hello, Owie gave $10. Thank you very much. And Jack also gave $10. Really appreciate it. Will says, my brain unfortunately made a connection, and now 4 years later, I can't shower without having an attack. Yeah. But it is possible to unwire that. We're going to talk about that in treatments. Exposure therapy sounds like it might be a good candidate for you. Again, not a therapist, not a doctor, just have a ton of experience I can only relate personally what has worked for me. I do recommend doctors and therapists, especially if you want to try some of the things that we're going to be talking about, like exposure therapy, cognitive behavior therapy. It's best to have someone knowledgeable about it lead you through that. But if you don't have access to that, or feel like you can't access that, there's a ton of information out there in order to educate yourself, like this stream today. Man, well, Rick, honestly, I think my anxiety comes from those people who pretend they are someone they're not, don't respect you, spread lies about you, just stresses you out. How do I deal with that? So let me go over the treatments first, and then I'll come back to your question towards the end. Jasmine, though, I think I have undiagnosed anxiety. Does a general practitioner have the ability to diagnose it, or should I ask a therapist/psychiatrist? So normally what will happen, at least what happened for me, is normally I found that general practitioners do not diagnose it and do not treat it. They will refer you to a psychiatrist who will diagnose you and then possibly medicate you. And then also, and or a therapist. But it's good to go to your general practitioner first because they can rule out things like your thyroid, do some blood work and things to make sure that it's not something that can be cured with medication outside of like antidepressants or something like that. Advice for dealing with air hunger feeling. Yes, I've experienced that. Over the past year, there was a span of, I don't even know, 4 months, I would say, where I thought about every single breath. And it was because of the air hunger feeling. So I will get to that a little later. But first, let's talk about the idea of treatments. Because I think this will answer your questions. All right, so the Claire Weeks method, which I have found is the method that works, is 4 steps. So there's facing, there's accepting, there's floating, and then there's letting time pass. So facing, and it's simple that it's only 4 steps, but being simple does not mean that it is easy. Like I said, I knew these steps. Took me a year and a lot of help in order to start to begin to recover. So the first one is facing. So if you fear a thought, then you give that thought more power. So if I think, okay, I can't think about being anxious. I can't think about these thoughts. I can't think about having a panic attack. If I push those away, if I distract myself away from them, they're not going to go away. They're just going to get stronger. So we do have to face them. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to dwell on them 24/7. Like I talked about in depression, healthy occupation is part of the treatment of anxiety, where you do need to try and keep your mind busy in order to allow yourself to heal. But when those anxious feelings and when those panic attacks come, we can't look away from them. We need to face them. And for me, that's one of the best ways that I can determine whether or not what I'm having is a panic attack or is something else. If I feel the urge to distract myself from it, I am probably not actually in danger from it. I just want relief from the feelings. And so I might, look at my phone. I might do a puzzle. I might try to watch some TV or something. So for me, that's a really good indication. If I want to distract myself away from it, then it probably is anxiety. So we've got to face it. But we can't just face it. And we don't want to face it and fight it. We don't want to try to, I'm going to just push through this and get through this, and you're going to go away and you're going to give up. That's not going to work. We've got to accept that our body is feeling this right now. We have to accept that this is uncomfortable, but that this is not something that's going to hurt us. We've got to accept it and allow it to happen. And it will fade. The next one is floating, which is like accepting. But when that moment of the panic comes, I don't try to distract myself away from it. I accept the fact that I'm having a panic attack, and I'm not trying to not have a panic attack. That's not the goal of what I'm trying to do. I'm instead allowing it to happen, and I'm relaxing myself into it as much as possible. So I can take a few deep breaths, but I'm not taking these deep breaths in order to get rid of the panic attack, in order to fight the panic attack, in order to push the panic attack away. I am taking those deep breaths in order to allow myself to relax and to just let the panic attack wash over me. When it comes to accepting and floating, for me, the big turning point was because it feels like you're going to stop breathing. It feels like you're going to go crazy. It feels like you're going to die. And so it was December, I believe it was December 17th. I was lying in bed having these panic attacks. Maggie was with me. And she helped me to be able to accept the panic attack, to try and make the panic attack as bad as it could possibly be, and to accept whatever it brought. So if that meant that it did what I feared, if it did kill me, if it did stop me from breathing, if it did overload my heart, if it did drive me crazy, I was able to deep down accept that outcome. And once I did that, I started to recover. Now, it took me months practicing that in order to have that moment and to be able to continue to do that afterwards. It didn't work the first time that I did it. It tried to do it. It didn't work the second time that I tried, the third time. It was a continuous effort. And it's an effort that I continue to practice even now. And that's true with a lot of this stuff. If you find things that are helping, do not stop doing those things when you stop feeling the anxiousness, especially right away. But I would continue to do those things throughout your life, or find other things that help. And then the next one is letting time pass. So that was in December. It is now May. I am still not completely recovered from the anxiety or the depression. The nerves are still raw. My emotions are still raw. But it is healing. You don't want to look at healing on a day by day. You don't want to wake up and be like, I feel just as bad as I did yesterday, or I feel worse today than I did yesterday. You just have to accept however you're feeling that day. Doesn't mean that you need to wallow in it. You can still continue to do things. And when we talk about a planned program of healthy occupation, like we did for depression, you're able to do more than you think you can when it comes to anxiety. Because the voice in your head is saying, like, there's danger everywhere, you can't do these things, you need to go into a dark room and hide because your fight or flight response is turned up to 11, there's nothing to fight, so we need to hide. But that's not the case. It's just a state that you're putting yourself in. And it won't be easy for you to focus on other things, especially at the start. But you don't want to stop doing those things because it will get worse and it will become harder over time. The person before about the issue with the shower, Will, right? If you had started working through that earlier, it would have been easier. Now it would be tougher after 4 years have passed and you've reinforced that for 4 years. But it doesn't mean that it's impossible. It doesn't mean that it can't be done. And so when we're talking about air hunger feeling, how I got over that was by accepting it. Being like, okay, this is how I feel now. This feeling in my chest, I'm going to accept it. I'm going to continue on. And it was still torturous, but eventually it did begin to subside. As the anxiety began to heal, my mind was able to focus on other things. And during that time, I was able to begin to heal. Now, sleep is an important part of that. You might need sleeping pills while you're especially anxious and panicked. You can still heal while not sleeping. One of Claire Weeks' audiobooks, she has a section where she sort of talks you through recovering while you're sleeping. You can lie still and recover even when not sleeping, but sleeping pills can be something that can help. So facing, accepting, floating, letting time pass. How do you deal with the physical symptoms? Yeah, it's the same advice, right? I've had all of these symptoms. You're talking about heart palpitation, chest pain, lightheadedness. You do not allow them to bewilder you. You tell yourself that this is caused by adrenaline. It's completely on this list. Rick went through this exact same thing. Thousands upon thousands, millions of people have gone through this exact same thing. And it did not hurt them, and it's not going to hurt you. So you have to understand that, and then you just have to accept those feelings. Because your natural instinct is to fix them, right? It's an uncomfortable thing, so I want to fix them. So I'm going to go and try and meditate. I'm going to take this medication. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to play video games because that makes me feel better. But that only delays and amplifies the problem. You got to face it. You got to accept it. You got to float with it. And you got to let time pass. And this is in, I would say, again, not a doctor, not a therapist, but the vast majority of cases. There can be other causes. You always want to check with doctors. You want to check with psychiatrists and therapists. I do highly recommend her book. It goes into all this stuff in more detail. But I found it does work. Okay. So that's the main things. But there's other things that can help and can also help you avoid falling into anxiety in the future. Exercise is a big one. And that's what caused the lack of exercise is what sort of caused me to fall into my state for this last year, because I did have that bad experience while exercising. I also had some injuries and surgeries and stuff that laid me out for a while. And so I wasn't able to use exercise as a healthy outlet for my anxieties. And so they were able to sort of pile up and build and stretch that leather over that drum until it became a problem. And then it just starts rolling downhill from there. So I do think that exercise is an important one, but it can be a tough one because, the feeling of exercise mimics a lot of the feelings of anxiety and panic attack. It causes your heart to beat faster. It causes you to sweat. It can cause you to shake. It can cause all these very similar things. But it's important to, I guess we'll talk about exposure therapy, the idea of exposure therapy, to be able to slowly acclimate yourself to the things that might be causing you panic attacks in order to rewire your brain into taking them as safe. Because if it sees it as dangerous or unfamiliar, you feel anxious from it. But if you've done it 1,000, 1,000,000 times, you are not feeling anxious from the act alone. You might have thoughts in your head that are making you anxious, but it's not the act alone that is now making you anxious. And so exposure therapy is something that I recommend trying to do with a therapist. But it's the idea of slowly over time exposing yourself. For me, for exercise, I would just do enough in order to start to get my heart up. So I would go up and down the stairs. And then I would sit on the stairs. I would stay in the place where I was anxious. And I would try to accept those feelings and float through them. And then I started to do my warm-up. And once I started feeling those feelings, I might sit down. I might face them. I might accept them. I might float through them. And then continue the exercise until I had finished my warm-up. Didn't matter how long it took. But if I had started to avoid it, then I would have reinforced it. So that's why it does help to have someone there with you in order to make you feel safer. So still, over a year passed, Maggie's still there around when I'm working out. I still haven't gotten over that yet. Exposure therapy. Cognitive behavior therapy is working to change negative thought patterns. So there's a ton of different workbooks and guides on cognitive behavior therapy. Again, a therapist can help you with this as well. There are a bunch of those techniques for free over at rollpunches.com. There's the campaign journal. Journaling is a good way in order to help rewire your brain. Things like gratitude journals can help, where you force yourself in order to look for positives. And the more that you recognize them, the more likely you are to continue to recognize them. You're building that pattern in your brain. Another one that I have found helpful, especially when it comes to conversations, so this is for social anxiety, if there is a conversation that I am particularly anxious about having, I will write that conversation down. I will write what I say, and then I will write what the other person would reasonably say, right? Not necessarily what my fears think them to say, although you can do that. That's another thing in the Roll with the Punches journal, where you can have that conversation from multiple different perspectives. So you can have it from your sort of child perspective, which is just feeling an emotion and panic and negativity. You can have it from Like that same conversation from the idea of like a critical parent, where it's someone who's saying things that are negative to you and are criticizing you. And then you can write that conversation again with a helpful parent. And then you can write it again with what you think is now reasonably to happen. This is the most likely thing to happen. And you can also do that with your negative thoughts. You can be like, well, I'm afraid that if I go to this party, I'm going to have a panic attack. And so you write that thought down, and then you write a response to that thought as if a friend had come to you with that thought and you were giving that friend advice. Like I talked about last week in depression, when our mind is in that storm, we can't think our way out of it. We have to externalize things. We have to take the thoughts outside in a way. That could be therapy, talking to someone else, talking to someone you love and trust, writing it down, dealing with it out here, and then taking it back inside. So that's one of the techniques for cognitive behavior therapy. Meditation and mindfulness. So you don't use the meditation as a distraction away from the anxiety and the panic. But by practicing different types of meditation, and there's all kind of different kinds, you can learn to separate sensations from thoughts, and thoughts from emotions, and emotions from sensations, because those are all separate things. They interconnect, but you can learn to realize that just because you think something does not make it true. And even if that thought gives you a feeling, that also doesn't make it true. So I can think, or I can have a feeling, and that feeling can give me a thought, but that thought isn't necessarily true. So my throat can feel like I'm closing up. And I can feel like it's going to close up to where I can't breathe, or I'm having an allergic reaction, I'm having an asthma attack. But your throat also can close up when you feel attracted to someone, or when you feel super excited. You can get those same sensations. So don't think in your anxious mind that you can diagnose your sensations. Just accept them for what they are. Oh, my throat feels like it's closing. Isn't that interesting? It doesn't really matter why it feels that way. It's interesting that it does feel that way. Try to look at it more curiously and clinically, rather than through fear. All right, did I cover everything I wanted to cover? Let me see if we do have some subscriptions. Hello, Owie, gifted 5 subs. Thank you very much. See if we have any donations. Anne Marie gave $10. Thank you so much. All right, so the people before who ask about air hunger, did I answer your question through that? Let me look through Roll with the Punches here. I have so much anxiety that I try to control, such as having a social conversation and stage fright. I guess people with autism experience anxiety. How does it affect them? Yes, I'm also autistic. Next week, autism will be the focus of next week's, I don't know what to call these, lectures, discussions, video stream, whatever. I'll be diving more deep into autism then. But what was your specific question? People with autistic people experience anxiety. How does it affect them? So, for me, I grew up not knowing that I was autistic, so I assumed everything was anxiety and everything was the panic disorder. I tried to fit everything through that lens. But I've come to realize that what I had previously recognized as panic attacks, some of those were meltdowns. Some of those were shutdowns. Often, I will have both. I will have a meltdown and a panic attack, or a panic attack and a meltdown. But for me, it was not understanding what meltdowns were and the different things that I can experience through the autism that weren't fitting into the anxiety puzzle the way that it should have, that caused that bewilderment and fear that made the anxiety worse. So that's part of it for me. Another thing about autism is we tend to have, and again, not speaking for all autistics, autism is a spectrum, but we tend to have rigid minds to where once we have a thought, we can sort of churn on that thought for a long time. And it can also be harder to change our minds sometimes. And so that's nasty when you get to anxiety and depression and these negative thoughts that you're having, because it can be harder to convince yourself that they are just thoughts, that they are not true. But I'm going to be talking more in depth about autism next week, so make sure you are following for that. Will says, my biggest series of panic attacks was in 2020. The thing that helped me the most and quickest was to hop into a cold shower. So that can help as a grounding method for sure. It can help you get over it. I, myself, still prefer to face, accept, float, and let time pass. Because my goal is not to get rid of the anxiety attack. Because, yeah, I could take a benzodiazepam, or I could shock myself with that cold shower. But those might just reinforce the panic attacks as something that I'm trying to avoid and can cause a problem. Now, I think there is a balance there between relief and facing, because you can wear yourself down with those repeated panic attacks. Like, I've had days upon days upon days where they've been near constant, and that includes night. And you just wear yourself down, and you just need relief for a little bit in order to regain your strength, in order to face, accept, float, and let time pass. So I think cold showers and stuff like that is a helpful tool, but I'm not convinced that it is a cure long term, if that makes sense. Lola Biek. I once had a panic attack whilst driving on the highway. It took me more than a week to get back into the car. Scared myself twice over. And in instances like that, you need to be kind to yourself, and you need to understand that that is a natural reaction. But it is a reaction that you will heal yourself from. So try to give yourself time to feel that anxiousness as you're driving. I wouldn't stay away from driving completely, but you can do things like sit in the car when it's not moving. You can drive a little further each time. You don't want that fear to build, I think. But also understand that it's natural that you feel that way. And when you're going through anxiety, when you're going through panic attack, because you've put yourself through such the ringer, of course you feel this way. Like, of course you're having these sensations. Of course there's a storm in your mind. It's all very logical, even though it's caused by emotions. Like, of course, this is how I'm feeling. And this is why I'm feeling it. So don't beat yourself up with, I shouldn't be feeling this. I should be stronger than this. I should be fighting this. I should be trying harder. Anxiety is a terrible thing. But it's a difficult thing to deal with, I should say. Because I don't want to label it as bad, because being anxious is natural, and it's not something that we should try to avoid. But living in that anxious state and having those panic attacks are very uncomfortable experiences, and it can lead to a tremendous amount of suffering. And it's very difficult to rewire your brain and change your mindset. And another part of the problem is life oftentimes does not give you those opportunities to heal. Does not lessen those stressors while you're healing the damage that the others caused. That's why changing your perspective, I think, and those ideas of facing, accepting, floating do help. And I think they will help even in those circumstances. It just might take longer. Will, how's being back going for you, Rick? Are the boys' lack of volume control giving you any grief? A little bit. The earplugs help with that. I'm definitely being very cautious about overextending myself as much as possible. I realize that I am still healing, and that a big part of my life needs to be focused on that as much as possible. Because I would rather be in front of the camera in a few videos. And so, like, you know. So when it comes to reactions, like I said before, didn't realize I was autistic until recently. And so I had a lot of time at Blind Wave not realizing that. And so I'm sitting next to these three loud guys under these bright lights watching these emotional shows, and I'm feeling terrible every day. And so my brain is still wired in a lot of ways to feel terrible in that environment. Even now that I've taken steps in order to make that less of a sensory and emotional nightmare, there's still a lot of wiring from all that time of just fighting and pushing through it. And so now I will go into the office, I will do some things, and then I will go home and work from home. And then I might come back into the office and do some things and then go home and work from home. And like try to make being in the office not the terrible experience that it was for so long. And not because of the people or not because of necessarily what the job was, but a lot of it is just the sensory environment, and a lot of it is also the emotional toll. Because when I get emotional about things, I get very emotional. I don't show it most of the time, but I feel what I showed at the end of the missing inside. I just have learned to, I've trained myself to suppress a lot of that, masking in order to fit in, or because I know if I let that out and I feel all those things, then I get wrecked and it takes me days to recover. So, we'll go in, do some work, come home, might do some yoga, do some work from home, trying not to let being in that environment get to the point where I am feeling super tense and stressed and feeling all of those terrible things that I was feeling before. I try to separate myself before it gets to that point and then work in a more comfortable environment, doing maybe less emotional things, and then going back, and then like back and forth is kind of how I'm dealing with it. And it is difficult to have people tell you just to calm down, don't understand what anxiety or panic attacks really are. You can send them this video or other videos. You can send them that book up there if they wish to be educated on the subject. But I agree. That is very difficult, and that can cause us to suppress them and to hide them, which can just make them worse. All right. Manuel. My social anxiety definitely has gone away, but it's still there. When I get the thought of it affects me, but that when I forget about it, it feels great. Noticed those sunglasses, so I researched them, ended up buying some for myself. They really help me a lot when I watch movies. I even get fewer panic attacks now. Thank you, Rick. You're inspiring a lot of people. It's helpful knowing that I'm not alone. But thoughts lead to behaviors and the cycle repeats again. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, these been super helpful. These also very helpful, or noise canceling headphones. I will often watch movies with noise canceling headphones. Porta party. I've learned to forget about my anxiety. Like, I don't know if it makes sense, but I can feel triggers. I can easily refocus my mind to something else. We'll say weed and video games work wonders for me. I do have social anxieties, but can fake through the situation. When I get home, I can be exhausted. Yeah, I mean, that's why I preach facing, accepting, floating, letting time pass, right? Because for, I don't know, 10 years, for a good deal of my life, that's what I did too. And I was exhausted, and I did have relapses that were getting worse and worse and worse. It was just pushing it away, and it would come back fiercer the next time. And when I should have been developing all of those other skills that I talked about under the treatment section, and having those in my toolbox and mastering them for when, in adulthood, I was inundated with much more stress, they weren't there for me. And so I've had to sort of develop them while in the thick of it, if that makes sense. Mad Noel. Yes, the air hunger goes along with everything else. My anxiety mutating to catch me off guard. Yes, that is a very good point. Even though all those sensations that I talked about at the beginning of stream, like that's pretty much the complete list, they can still feel ever so slightly different in a way that you don't expect, and then the bewilderment comes again. And so you have to go through that facing, accepting, floating, letting times pass all over again. Those new mutations will come and go. I have to be okay with it. Thanks for answering my question. It gives me hope to hear that you overcame that specific symptom. Yeah, and I mean, Maggie will tell you, like, I do not think it is an exaggeration to say every second of every day for months was thinking about every single breath. And it still comes back, but I've gone days without it. And it will continue to improve. But it is so scary and it is so hard. Like, don't think for a second that it's easy, or anything that I'm saying is easy, but also don't think that it's not possible. Jess, hey Rick, I'm glad you mentioned having Maggie around you when you exercise. My anxiety/agoraphobia definitely often means I feel the need to have someone near me so they can help me if I feel the symptoms, because my anxiety tends to jump to, I'm not going to be able to function, and I can't function properly if I can't help myself. Just feel this way forever and die, and no one will help me. Feels embarrassing as a 30-year-old adult, but yeah, and I've had that feeling too. But I've kind of had to accept death, I think, to recover from this, where death isn't the scary thing that it was. And that's not an easy thing to do, but it has taken away a lot of the power of the anxiety. And it's not the same thing as not wanting to live. It's just finding a way to accept any outcome that comes and know that you'll survive it, or you won't, and then it won't matter. But, you know, that we're wired for survival. So everything in our brain and body is going to fight against that. But it is possible to accept even that, to accept even death. And I'm glad I didn't have to do it alone. Do we have anything else before I get to the last part? Darth, I'm not sure I understand exactly what you're saying. I have anxiety and panic attacks. Sometimes I feel like just thinking about it, and sometimes it just goes away. Makes my heart go fast, but it goes normal again while I'm having a panic attack. Yeah, so if we don't give it that bewilderment and fear, the panic attack will last maybe half an hour. You might have another one. But your body's not designed to have that adrenaline firing for an extended period of time. So you can have all those negative thoughts and sort of hold yourself in that position until the next one comes. But if you don't do that, it will just go back to normal. Okay, let's talk about what I can do for someone suffering from anxiety. You can show them this video. You can give them that book. There's other great resources out there as well. But her works are by far my favorite. They are older. Some of the stuff is a little outdated. It talks about some like shock therapy and stuff like that. But don't let that turn you off. The core ideas, her core ideas are at the center of pretty much every other anxiety book that I've read that's come after since. It's just different ways of saying her words. I do think her audiobooks are a little, I don't want to say better, but a little more digestible. I think she's a better speaker than she necessarily is a writer. Makes sense because she was a doctor, like a general practitioner, I believe. So I recommend her audiobooks and that book. Her audiobooks are like, back in the day, I guess they would have been records, but like books on tape, where she'll walk you through going to the store, or she'll walk you through sleeping at night, or all these different situations which are so commonly anxious filled. Going on vacation, she'll sort of talk you through that, and you can listen to her as you're doing those things to help have that calming voice contrast against the negative, fearful voices that are going on inside your head. But yeah, education, very helpful. Sometimes that's all people need to know, is you just tell them, yeah, it's just anxiety. And they're like, oh, great. And bam, it's gone. It doesn't happen for me, but it does happen for some people. You can help them face panic attacks. So if they do have panic attacks, you can be available to them via the phone or in person when they are having them, and try to give them a safe space in order to have them. You can also be in proximity when they're doing that healthy occupation that we talked about before, where you're getting them to do things in order to get their mind off from it so that they can recover. You're playing video games with them, you're taking them stone skipping, doing something like that. But being with there, or they can call you and talk to you while they're wearing noise canceling headphones or something while they're going to the store, could be of tremendous help. Reassuring them that it is anxiety, it's panic, it's normal, it's uncomfortable, but it isn't actually going to harm them, and it is something that they can overcome. I said, like, helping get that exposure. If they are going through exposure therapy, if they're afraid of driving, sit with them in the car. Sit with them as they drive a little further. And then you can help them get help. You can research and find nearby therapists. You can call and make the appointment for them. Things like that. Shock therapy is still a thing, and I'm not a doctor. It might be effective for certain things. It just was used for a lot more things in the past than it should have been. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things that it is useful for now. I'm not educated enough on the subject to be able to speak to it. Porta Party with a good point. We're all just overstimulated for hundreds and thousands of years. All we heard was the wind and animals and water. In this span of a little over 100 years, created this loud, fast-moving world that we live in. And it's especially worse for autistics and neurodivergent people, I feel like. The world is not designed for us in many ways, and we have to adapt. Is disassociating healthy to an extent? Can you describe that a little more? So you mean like disassociating as in seeing yourself from outside of your own body to sort of separate yourself from your feelings and sensations? That's a common thing that I do when it comes to meditation. There are these grounding techniques that you can do if you are having a panic attack and you don't, for whatever reason, you don't want to face except float in that moment. One thing that can help is a grounding technique where you name 5 things you can see, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell. Just forcing yourself to focus on things that are outside of you can reset yourself, and is just a good thing to practice. It's good to practice for when you need it, but also just you're working that muscle, and it just makes you healthier, I find. When do you get to PTSD? Might be off, but I thought you mentioned at the beginning of the stream. Yeah, so I did talk about that before. So I think everything I talked about applies. It's just PTSD is all of these things that are coming from like a particular negative experience and tend to be associated with that. But it doesn't have to be either. It could just be triggered by it. And then you have the same sort of anxiety that we're talking about now. And I think the healing is largely the same. Exposure therapy might be useful if it was like an event that caused you to do it. If it was brought about by like intense like feelings or sadness or something like that, a loss, then a therapist finding someone that you can talk to and help resolve some of those feelings can also be very helpful. But as far as a lot of the anxiety and the panic stuff, I think a lot of that still tracks. Although there are a lot of other medically approved things that are for PTSD, but not necessarily for anxiety, such as medical marijuana. A lot of states will prescribe that for PTSD, but not prescribe that for anxiety or for panic disorder. But, you know, I don't want to lump all PTSD inside of one thing, but having had it, it is more similar to panic disorder than it is not. And I think a lot of what I talked about dealing with panic disorder also applies. And I've heard a lot of people say that, CBD, THC helps them with anxiety. I don't think it's helped much. Part of the issue is when you are healing and when things are helping, you might not notice it immediately at first. It's like I talked about last week with the depression and the idea of charging the battery. The lights might not turn on until the battery's at a certain point. So you might have no indication that something is helping until later, once you have begun to heal. But it was helping all along, you just weren't in a state that you noticed it yet. So I do wonder about that when it comes to THC for me, where I haven't really noticed it help in that aspect. But I have taken it in order to help like my tenseness relax so that I get less of that back pain, which can trigger anxiety and meltdowns and things like that. It's also helped with mood things as well. So I would talk to a doctor or a therapist before it comes to trying any sort of that stuff myself, but it has helped a lot of people. So is it okay if I ignore my anxiety? I'm always exercising every morning to keep me straight. So I don't think exercising is ignoring the anxiety. I think it can treat it and help with it and help it stop from being a problem in the future. But there will be a point in your life where you cannot exercise. This is what I have experienced. Whether it's injury, whether it's getting older, you might not be able to do the exercise in order to manage it. So now, while you can do that, you should also be working on other techniques that you can use when you cannot exercise. I think. So don't stop the exercising. Continue to do it. But if it is a problem for you, start doing these techniques so you have them in the future, or by accepting, floating, facing, not in that order. Maybe that plus the exercising will get you to the point where I was a couple years ago, where the anxiety was just gone. And it was wonderful. But even still having the anxiety and having it back, like, you know, there was a lot of things that led up to my depression. But it was so depressing getting to that point and then falling back into it again. And then even as I was recovering, like now, my anxiety is where it has been for most of my life. And it's like, like I tasted that and I don't want to live like this anymore. And then it wasn't getting better. And now I've accepted that, well, I'm going to continue to do things in order to improve it. But if this is the final stage, which I know that it isn't, because I do believe that I will continue to heal. But even if it is, then I have survived it and I will continue to survive it. Medication, I've been really stuck. I have a phobia of taking medication. I avoid it at all costs. Scared of being sick. Can't swallow tablets whole. Takes me a good while to ease into medication to prove myself it won't hurt me. Think medication can just take the edge off. It doesn't change things, so you feel like you're still not in control of doing the work. Yeah, so same with me. Have intense fear of taking new medication. Any kind of medication. Doesn't matter if it's, you know, like now I've taken Tylenol and things, but if I hadn't taken Tylenol and took Tylenol for the first time, I would be in tears. It's just a terrible experience for me. So I definitely understand that. And it's another one of those things where I just have to accept it. I accept that if I have some sort of terrible reaction to this, that, you know, Maggie will find me and will get me to a hospital and it will be fixed, or it won't, and I die, and that's okay. Which I sound so flippant, but it wasn't easy to get to that point. But it does help once you get there. Any other questions? That's all I have to cover for today. I'm starting to lose my voice. But if we have anything else, I feel like, I mean, this isn't everything there is to cover, but I feel like we covered a lot. Yeah, you kind of can't do anything, you have to accept. Yeah, it's backwards, right? Because the harder you try, the more it holds on. But as soon as you let go, not as soon, but once you let go, it begins to fade. And that's something that's really hard to be able to discover on your own, because it's so counterintuitive. People naturally want to control. Yeah, and I think autistics are, if I understand correctly, are even worse in that area, where we want to control more things about ourselves and our environment. And I also feel sensations more. Like, before I started taking the propanol, I could feel my lungs expand. I felt every time my heart beat. Like, I just am aware, I think, more than most people seem to be about sensations in my body. And add that to the anxiety, I notice all of these symptoms, and it's not something that I can just ignore. They're just there. The propanol is nice in that I can't feel my heart anymore, unless it's like really beating. It has been helpful for that. Jazz, with anxiety and depression, how did you check if you were autistic? I'm suspicious I might be too. Don't know where to start finding out if the reason I can't treat my depression is because it's not the source of the problem. So it depends where you are. For me, I had to do telehealth appointments in Columbus because nowhere around me did autism diagnosis for adults. So, and actually comes to find out there aren't any really near that do it for children either. So for me, I had to just search online for like telehealth, autism, adult diagnosis. And then I was able to find one. Now, unfortunately, it was quite expensive, and it was not covered by insurance. That case might be different for you. But once I opened myself up to the possibility and I learned more about it, I had no doubt that I was. I'm trying to think back and make sure that's true. Like, I definitely felt anxious about having those appointments and getting that validation. But I think deep down, I had no doubt. So even if I hadn't have gotten it, I don't think anything would have changed into how I feel about myself and the steps that I've taken. It was just a nice bit of validation, but honestly, I was sure before. Check your phone. Oh no. See you, Mad Noel. Talking about these topics can be scary. You're welcome. Thank you for coming. Very handsome, inspirational man. That's my closing statement. Well, thank you, Will. I appreciate it. All right, well, I think that's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for joining us. Next week, like I said, autism will be the topic coming next Wednesday. And even if you are not autistic, it is always good to inform yourself for when you encounter autistic people, I think. Wait, can you answer my question, you said? Remind me of the question. I must have missed it. Saturday, we are doing Mind Games Part 3 with Psychonauts 2, Chicory, A Colorful Tale, a couple other games in there as well. It's going to be very exciting. Looking forward to that. Eric's still going through God of War. We have a podcast tomorrow. Should be a good time. Friday, I think, is a Pokemon race again, if I am correct. And then I want to say the last Friday of the month is going to be a very special Rock Band stream. So make sure that you are following us over at Blind Wave Gaming and or at twitch.tv/blindwave. Also, Roll with the Punches YouTube channel for more talks like this. Okay, Manuel, yes. Now I remember. Honestly, I think my anxiety comes from people who pretend they are someone they're not, don't respect you, spread lies about you, and it just stresses me out. How do I deal with that? Well, I would say you can't change other people. I would have honest and open communications with those people about what you feel like they're doing and how it's affecting you. But those people might not care. you can only control how you feel and how you act. Well, you can't even really control how you feel, but you can control your perspective on a thing. You can give those people energy by worrying about them and by worrying about the things that they say and by them pretending to be something that they're not. But you focusing on that and worrying about it is just giving them fuel that's better deserved for more productive things. So if you can, separate yourself from them, I would say. And if you can't, then just, if you're saying they're spreading lies, then you have a truth that you believe in. Just continue to believe in that and tell that to people. Without knowing like the specific situation, I suppose that's the best advice that I can give. All right. You were welcome, Manuel. You're welcome, everyone else. And thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for your questions. Had a fun time talking with y'all. It, the thing that I like to keep in mind whenever I am suffering is that suffering does not necessarily lack purpose. Because I have suffered in my life, I am able to have these talks. I am able to help other people, hopefully. I am able to share things. I am able to inform because I have informed myself because I was dealing with these things. And, I do not always feel good, but that is not the goal. The goal is to live as healthy a life as I can. And sometimes it is healthy to be sad or to be anxious. Those are natural things. Those are not things that I am trying to fight. When will be the next anxiety stream? So I'm not sure. For this month, I'm going to have autism next week. I have a plan for the one after that, but there's some things I want to get straight before I announce that. And then after that, I will find another day in order to have some more mental health streams. I'm not sure like how often to have them. I'm not sure what form that should take. If it should just be question and answer, if it should be like specific topics. If you have ideas for that, leave it down in the comment below. If there's like specific topics that you would like to talk about. An ADHD stream, that's what I was thinking about for not next week, but the one after. But I would really like to have Maggie in on that one as well, but I haven't asked her yet. So, where to find resources? Okay. But yeah, just put them in the comments of that video over at Roll with the Punches. That'll be a good place where I can go back and look. You can also put it in the Discord channel, the Roll with the Punches Discord channel at discord.gg/blindwave. All right, well, I think that's going to do it before I do lose my voice completely. So thanks, guys, so much. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you are able to start healing. And I hope that you can get out there and roll with the punches. Thanks, guys. I'll see you Saturday. Later.